Hello, hello, welcome, please come in. Our makeup work is completed, at least for now, so it's time to get to the summary portion and discuss how all these runs went. But before I can start ranking things, I do need to explain how we'll be ranking them. Because obviously, I can't just compare the runs in this series to each other, they're completely different challenges. So instead, I have gone back and rewatched all the relevant summary videos, see what I placed where, and thought about where these new runs should go. And if you're a person who makes things, you may be aware that going back to watch or look at or read anything you have made older than like 6 months, it is a nightmare. And yeah, it wasn't the most fun experience. I'm sorry, did you wake up from a nap and decide now is the time to record voiceover? Why does it sound like you're about to fall asleep? But we power through, examine our past projects, and here we are ready to rank the new videos in their respective series. And that starts with difficulty, and that starts with Final Fantasy III Black Mages Only. And as a refresher, the prior difficulty comparison looked like this. And Final Fantasy III gets to be slotted into the 3rd place ranking, just above FF1 and just below FF12. FF3 is surprisingly on the easy side for Black Mages, still not as easy as FF1, where the strategy mostly consisted of use strong spells, win game, or equip Masamune, use buffs, hope, and that mostly comes down to the fact that Black Magic is pretty good in FF3. You do lose the buffs that made Black Mage useful in FF1, but in exchange, magic actually deals damage. And I mean really good damage from start to finish. Black Mages are quite strong in this game. The only real exception to this was the Goldor fight, who has a distinctly high magic defense. Even the final bosses took a lot of damage. Turns out Flare is very strong, and could serve as a pretty effective backbone of my late-game offenses. And while less useful, Meteor and Drain were also fairly useful at some points. Honestly, mostly when leveling up to prepare for the World of Darkness, but still. It still wasn't a cakewalk. Black Mages suffer from the same limitations in FF3 as they always do, low durability and very little ability to support. And by little I mean zero. Black Mages have lost anything even approaching a support spell since FF1 in exchange for damage. And while I think that exchange is honestly pretty worth it, it does still count as a loss. And they definitely don't get to be placed any higher in the difficulty ranking. While there were a few sections of difficulty, nothing approaching FF12's endgame. Given all I've learned about FF12 in the intervening time, I may need to redo that run at some point. But at least for now, FF12 Black Mages really struggle in the endgame. They're just so squishy, and so bad at healing, and they just love to die. All the time. And you do kind of see that mirrored in FF3, but at least FF3 has elixirs, and you really don't need those for more than the final boss. Okay, maybe a handful against a Hreeman. So FF3 gets to exist in 3rd place. And that brings us to our no shopping run. And here's the tier list as constructed for that series difficulty. And I think FF4 no shopping gets to be placed in 3rd. FF4 no shopping was basically entirely defined by lack of great armor. Seems like you do get some armor in treasure chests. But the rest you're really expected to purchase in shops. Some of this is mitigated by characters joining late with current armor, but other than the odd equipment piece here and there, my party was considerably less durable than I'd prefer. And healing items and tents were at a premium throughout the whole run. However, it fails to be any higher on the list because FF4 is a pretty easy game. At least the Pixel Remaster version is. The difficulty of this game may be based on the FF2 Easy Mode version released in the States originally. Hard to tell because FF4 has had so many versions and I kinda just glossed over the release section. This would have likely been a very different run if I'd done this on the much more difficult DS version, but this is the version I've chosen and I'm fine with that. FF4 does make a habit of ensuring you have at least one white mage most of the time, which is great, even if it's Tella, and physical and magical damage numbers get quite high, especially once you start exploring the Lunar Subterra and start getting all the endgame equipment, which also functionally ends the challenge, because at that point, the run has basically become a normal playthrough. Though that's honestly not super uncommon in these runs. Final Fantasies love to put all the best items in the final dungeon not locked behind a shop. So while I wouldn't say this run was that difficult, it's definitely not as easy as Spam Magic FF6 or Why Would You Buy Things FF2, but it definitely can't be placed higher than FF9 or FF7. And then we arrive at Final Fantasy V Time Mages Only, and we must consider the difficulty of this game in the prior series. This is made a little more difficult because, well, technically I never did a series on Time Mages. There is only one other game with Time Mages in mainline Final Fantasy. So the prior game, FF12, was done as a one-shot. And so we need to hop back to FF12 as only Time Mages and rank them compared to just each other. And this is actually pretty easy to do. FF5 Time Mages gets to be placed in the second slot in difficulty, and it's not particularly close. Time Mages in FF5 are really easy. The only portion of this run that is properly difficult is the very beginning of the game. Time Mages don't get any time magic before walls, and their weapon and armor access is real bad. This can be slightly mitigated for one of the bosses thanks to the Ice Rod and Carwin, but that does mean slogging through 2 bosses before that in either the Magissa or Garula fight. And while there is time magic in walls and a healing staff in Tycoon, neither of these are super good. But once that is completed, we get to Karnak, which sells rods, which can be broken to invalidate large portions of the game. Seriously, it's just so stupid. It's not a cheap strategy, and it really strains the finances early on, but you cannot deny that efficacy. And once you reach World 2, you don't even need to break rods anymore, at least for the most part, because Time Mages get a proper offensive spell in Comet, which is inconsistent but very cheap, and much stronger than its cost would suggest. Combined with buffing spells that carried me through basically the rest of the run, right up until I got Meteor, which was just Comet, but infinitely better. Time Mages get really strong at the end of the game, and they were already very good. I can't talk about FF12 Time Mages only very much, mostly because I don't have that footage anymore, but FF12 Time Mages struggle in basically every way. Their damage is bad throughout, because crossbows in 12 are awful, even when they aren't getting negated by windy weather. They can get Cura by defeating a Dramalek, but only one character can learn it, and because they use heavy armor, they won't actually heal that much. Really, Time Mages are just kind of awful in FF12. They make a decent second license board for a character, but trying to stand on their own, they suck. Which is why FF12, Time Mages Only, is in first place in this difficulty comparison. And next on the list is Final Fantasy X-2 with only White Mages. And here is the difficulty ranking for White Mages as previously determined, and FF10-2 gets to slide right into 3rd place. It's honestly kind of close between this and FF3, as both have kind of similar problems. White Mages in both games are very good at staying alive, but can actually deal a bit of damage. In Final Fantasy III, this comes in the form of arrow magic, and in FF10-2, this comes in the form of black magic access, either through garment grids or accessories. However, while FF10-2 does get more spell access, and the endgame is completely wrecked by Flare and Ultima, I still think it's a little bit harder. Maybe I was just way under-leveled thanks to having good healing, but White Mages really struggled to deal a lot of damage in the mid-game. And while they can heal and buff, they are still very frail. 10-2 also loves to throw out bosses that deal damage to your MP, which is a problem. Honestly, I'm wondering if my only reason for placing 10-2 as more difficult is because of all the MP nonsense I had to deal with. It is possible. That being said, it definitely doesn't get to be any higher. FF12 White Mages are possibly the worst damage dealers of any White Mage run, other than FF5, which we don't talk about. And FF1 is difficult because of bad damage, but also a slog because White Mages are genuinely quite durable. Yeah, 10-2 gets to be 3rd. And speaking of MP problems, we arrive at FF12 with only magic, and this gets to be placed in 2nd place. So fast, so easy. It outstrips the difficulty of everything below it by a mile. FF8 is a joke, FF6 is a different kind of joke, I guess. FF2 can be tricky, but magic levels up and can get quite strong. Really only FF7 manages to be more difficult. But why does magic only get to be so high on the list? Magic is really strong in FF12. And yes, that is genuinely true. Of all the games on this list, I think only FF6 competes for how strong magic can be. And that's actually kind of hard to compare. I'm not actually sure how close Ultima is to Ardor, because one can break the damage limit. But FF12, bosses have a lot more HP. Anyway, no, the damage is not the problem. Neither is healing, actually. No, the problem is, in short, MP. It defines this challenge in a way it doesn't in any of the other runs, except FF7, which is why FF7 gets to be higher on the list, and it's pretty close. Maintaining MP in FF12 when that is your only option for damage was, bluntly, a lot more difficult than I expected. You just run out of MP so fast. Even at the beginning of the game, when you're casting spells barely stronger than basic attacks, look, there goes all your MP. That is mitigated somewhat by passive MP regen and licenses that restore MP, but those are really only meaningful at the end of the game when you are dealing over 9,000 damage per spell. Before that, oof. And the final fights are also no joke. Specializing in casting classes means less durability than I'd like, and you have to fight 3 bosses back to back with no MP restoration, which can make MP management even more difficult. Aside from MP, there are other issues. Bosses with Reflect On are a pain, especially with how late the Opal Ring shows up. You can mitigate this a bit thanks to really strong Reflect strategies, but that also means I couldn't heal, which meant hoping that I was dealing enough damage fast enough to outpace the boss. Which worked, obviously, I completed the run, but wow, there was some clenching going on. The Opal Ring helps this out a lot because bypassing Reflect to heal or damage is a really strong ability to have, but wow, it still meant a lot of micromanaging. This is easily the most frantic menuing I've ever had to do in FF12. There's just no great way to set up gambits for a lot of this nonsense. And with the difficulty rankings out of the way, it's time for the much more coveted recommendation section. And that will start with Final Fantasy III, Black Mages Only. And FF3 gets to slide into the third position. Yeah, it's in the same place as difficulty and gets to make a nice ascending list. FF3 Black Mages Only was kind of fun, but also can't really compete against the games higher than it in recommendation. FF5 has big damage numbers throughout, FF12 has even bigger damage numbers. Wait, is this just about big damage numbers? It might be. Which, give me a moment, I can spin this. So the thing with Black Mages is that their whole deal, after FF1, is to deal big damage. So, in many ways, the more damage, the more they are doing their job. The more fun I'm having. And so, yeah. Anyway, the real reason it exceeds FF1 is that it's more interesting. FF1 bosses are pretty flat in a lot of cases. The only bosses I even remember in the original FF1 playthrough was Merilith, because high magic defense, and Chaos, because unbalanced. But even those don't really prompt any interesting tactical decisions, you just need to grind up so your numbers are better. FF3 also suffers from this. A lot of the bosses in the game can feel pretty samey. It wouldn't really be until FF4 that bosses would start to feel properly different. Which also explains why FF3 doesn't get to be any higher. Even when the bosses suck to face, like the Archeoavis or the Elder Worm, they are just more interesting fights that require more actual strategy. Still, any day FF3 doesn't crumble into last place in recommendations is a win. And then we reach FF4, no shopping, and look at the list. Let's put this in third. Yeah, this game gets to be slotted directly into the middle position recommendation, which feels right. FF4 presents a pretty good balance of interesting boss encounters with some actual losses from not being able to buy armor and healing items. FF2 is a bit too flat because turns out you don't actually need to buy anything in this game, especially when you get a haste tome as a very lucky drop. FF6 has some stuff going for it, but Magicite is almost all free, and magic is way too strong in this game. But there really aren't as many interesting decisions in this game as you get in 9 or 7. Mostly because the long-term impacts of not buying items are pretty limited. You still get all your spells and abilities, you will eventually get all the weapons and armor you need. You don't really need healing items most of the time, thanks to the prevalence of white magic access. So while there are definitely some points where the lack of purchasing things creates difficulties, these are always temporary problems. And given how strong attacks and magic are in this game, they're relatively pretty minor. FF9 gets to be higher because even once you have endgame equipment, you're still missing a lot of useful abilities and passives. And FF7 earned the highest ranking because I ended up not having a lot of staple materia that would have been really useful to have, meaning there were a lot of strategic considerations right up until credits. FF4 no shopping was still fun, but the impacts of the no shopping felt pretty limited and very temporary. And that just means it cannot go any higher on this list. Oh well, at least FF4 finally got to appear on the channel. Now I just need to figure out a series to include FF10 in. FF5 Time Mages. This gets to go in first place, and it's not hard to tell why. Time Mages in FF12 are not very good as a standalone class, and they are not very fun to deal with. Their damage is bad. Their spells are mostly worthless. Even with Haste and Berserk, Bosch was still dealing pretty awful damage, which is impressive with a strength weapon and heavy armor. It didn't help that Crespos missed constantly in some very key fights. By contrast, Time Mages in FF5 are great. They do suffer early on because they don't get many damaging spells and don't have any damaging spells until World 2, but at least rods exist and can be broken, and once we enter the Comet and then Meteor portion of the game, Time Mages are so good. They do still suffer a bit from having a lot of not particularly useful spells, but who cares? Meteor, Comet, Hastega, Quick. The useful spells they do have are all incredible. And while that doesn't make the game completely free, there are still some problems that Time Mages can run into. It's very fun and very effective, which is a great contrast against FF12. At some point I will probably rank all the license boards in FF12 based on how good they are in single board runs, but for now suffice to say Time Mage will definitely be near the bottom of that list. Okay, let's move on to Final Fantasy X-2, White Mages Only. And this is an interesting problem in that, as I said in the original summary video, I would not recommend any of the White Mage Only runs to anyone. They're all kind of miserable in slightly different ways. Well, actually some ways are different, some are the exact same. And perhaps, because every other run in this series is miserable, FF10-2 can earn the top slot. Huzzah! We love getting the top slot in recommendation. It's a pretty rare occurrence for a 10-2. And yeah, did it only earn top plays because every other game in this list hit rock bottom and started digging? Yes. However, White Mages do actually have a decent amount going for them here. One big issue White Mages suffer in every game is damage. Even in FF3, where they had Arrow and Eroga, they don't really deal a ton of damage. Usually Holy can help with this, but how impactful that actually is can vary. But in 10-2, White Mages get to cheat and steal all the black magic for their own. And while their magic stat is not as high as Black Mages, I think, they can still deal really good damage, and they have the added benefit of being able to innately cast defensive buffs. I wonder why Final Fantasy got rid of offensive buffs after FF2. Actually thinking on it, it's because they were incredibly broken, huh? Anyway, White Mages just have access to healing and defensive spells, and while I didn't get access to Holy because I screwed up the stuff you need to do to get it, Flare and Ultima are at least as good, especially when they hit the damage cap. And if I'd had Holy one fight earlier, the annoyance that was Anima would have gone much better. But oh well, nothing I can do about that. Regardless, this run definitely earns the top slot because it was way less awful than the other White Mage runs. And finally, Magic Only in FF12. And this game, despite its difficulty, in spite of how limited MP was and how annoying that ended up being in some places, FF12 gets to earn the second slot. I've said it before, I will say it again, but my mark of how much I enjoyed a run is never really about difficulty. It's always about how interesting a run is. And boy, howdy was this run pretty interesting. Between countering limited MP, dealing with Reflect, trying not to die because I'm underleveled and my party is frail, this run was quite interesting and genuinely a lot of fun. When things go well in FF12, the game can be a bit of an auto-battler. You've unlocked all the things, your gambits are well set up. The question is really, is that enough, and what minor tweaks or manual commands you might need to make to ensure victory? That was absolutely not how this run went. I'm not sure there were any bosses I went into with gambits set up and just let the game play out. Maybe Garuda? But every fight was full of constant command entries and manual work. Countering Reflect, maximizing damage with Reflect, switch characters around to account for whoops, everyone else is dead. This was really interesting. It doesn't quite earn the top slot, that still goes to FF7, mostly because FF7 had a lot of strategizing and then the fights themselves were a bit more streamlined. I love FF12, but because this game is built around the gambit system, having to manually enter so many commands so constantly can be kind of annoying. The menus are a little bit janky, the targeting is a bit weird in the real-time setting, and in Wait, it means the combat grinds to a halt, especially when I need to manually enter more than one character's commands at once. Again, still very good, but a bit less good than FF7. And that was Final Fantasy makeup work, for now at least. As many have been commenting, there are definitely runs I could have included that I didn't. But who knows, there will likely be another round of makeup work at some point in the future, and that sounds good to me. I did want to shout out that I do have a Patreon, linked in the description. I spend a lot of time making these videos, so if you enjoyed the video, want to support the channel, and are financially stable enough to do so, that exists. No pressure though, this channel is free to enjoy for everyone and will remain that way. For now, if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you'd like to see more of this, feel free to subscribe. Hey, maybe leave a comment if you have something you'd like to say. But whatever you decide to do, have a safe trip home.